So, welcome and hello to the live stream. My name is Teemu Tapanila, and today I will be talking about deploying with confidence and speed to Microsoft Azure using Visual Studio Team Services. I tried to make the longest title in our whole conference. It didn't even fit here, so the real one is Visual Studio Team Services, but just couldn't fit it to the slides. Just a very quick question. How many is using Visual Studio Team Services? How many like it? Well, not that many hands, but still, almost 60%, which is good. So let me introduce myself. I work currently in a company called Cloud Paralysis. I have been Microsoft Azure MVP since 2014. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and then I do our own podcast lately. If you have any questions, again, if you have good feedback, Twitter publicly, awesome. If you have any other feedback, email. Makes more sense. Any questions you want to ask, what do I think about ARM, what do I think about VSTS, email is always good. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about agenda. So we're first going to talk about DevOps. How many here like DevOps? Not that many people. How many here do DevOps? I think that's one of the most loaded words currently, that everybody's saying, we are doing DevOps. If you ask them what DevOps means, you get so many answers as times you ask the question. If you ask the same person, let's say every month, the answer will be different. Amazing. Then we're going to a little bit talk about ARM templates. Because if you're wanting to do deployments to Azure using VSTS, your best option is to use ARM templates. So we are not going to go that much into like how exactly you write the ARM templates, but we're more talking about best practices from developers' perspective of like what do you need to have there. Then we are going to go Visual Studio Team Services and practices there. So we are going to focus very heavily on the Visual Studio Team Services. But let's start talking a little bit more deeper about DevOps. These days, it's everybody's saying like, we are doing DevOps. And if you ask them what it means, mostly it's like, it's automation. And then you ask, so what are you automating? So when I do a commit, my code automatically gets published to dev environment, and then there is some kind of like acceptance process, and then it gets to testing environment, and then it gets to production environment. And we are doing DevOps, right? No. DevOps is not only that thing. I would say that's CI/CD, so continuous integration, continuous delivery, which we are most focusing today. But that's not, like if you're using that, that's not like we are all DevOps. It's more like we are just taking very good parts of the automation, making the life of our developers so much better. But it's still very far away from DevOps, just to make clear. So, ARM templates. How many are using ARM templates? How many like them? Good. Not that many. Personally, I have a very this love-hate relationship to the ARM templates. Yes. I mean, I don't think that there's anybody who says like they're totally horrible or they're like totally, I love them, they're the best in the world. Everybody's kind of like, they're kind of necessary evil, but once you got them right, they help you to make so many good things. So what I'm going to say is like few things that were not mentioned yesterday. One of them is versioning. So here, everybody who's using ARM templates, how many does versioning of them? There is this content version on the top of the file. How many use it? Almost nobody. That's a very interesting thing is that for some reason, developers are really good at versioning their code. There is always like version numbers, build numbers, and all of that. But when I ask about ARM templates, everybody's like, oh yeah, our ARM template version is still 1.0.0.0 because that's the default value. The interesting thing is that it doesn't even matter what you put on the versioning field. You can put any string value there. You can keep them nice names if you want. Then under is tags. How many is using tags currently in Azure? Tags is one of the most important things once you start to have lots of resources. Why? Because let's say I've named my nice web app something like Teemu web app. Now you're seeing it important and thinking like, so what is Teemu web app doing? Okay, you can go inside of the resource, start looking which URLs does it respond. You see how much performance it is doing, how many requests it is responding, but that doesn't really tell you anything. How do you even know who to contact? Like if you think there is an issue for it or anything. So one of the best ways is to put tags on resources. So on tags you can put, for example, if you need to contact somebody, here is an email. If you need to think, which project does this resource belong to? Here is the project name. If you need to know like who's the manager responsible, you can put all of that to the tags. Another thing is ARM templates should be small. So how many here have written more than 1,000 lines of ARM template or have ARM templates that are more than 1,000 lines? Like I always, like if I try to do one ARM template, I get almost right away over 1,000 lines. So one of the important things is the splitting them in a one ARM template per basically one resource. Because if they're small, it's way easier to make changes. If I, for example, start like, oh, here is my ARM template, and I give you, let's say, 5,000 lines of JSON, who would be happy to make changes? Like, it would take you ages just to understand what the heck is happening here. Like, why is there this string? It's referencing that, it's referencing that, it's referencing that. It waits keys for that resource. It waits that one to be deployed first. It will get totally insane. So that's why having them small helps you. Another thing is like, if we have very small resources, it's way easier to make changes. So if we split them into very small parts, you can easily go and make changes to the part that you especially want. Then a little bit about the ARM deployment steps. So currently, how many are directly pushing the ARM templates to production, for example? Oh, nobody? Good. So how many does the same first deployment using ARM template to test, and then to production from your own machine using PowerShell? That's pretty common. Because that's super easy. Like, Microsoft has made it super easy to do that. Do you know what's the problem with that solution? If I ask your coworker, can you do a deployment with the ARM template? They're like, no, I've never done it. We have only the one guy who can do deployments. What if something happens to that guy? We're not doing deployments for a while. And then when the next guy comes in, what he needs to do? Start from the huge ARM template. 5,000 lines of JSON. Amazing experience. So the ARM deployment, how this should be, is that you should first of all have your ARM templates in a version control. I hope everybody has their ARM templates on a version control. Doesn't matter what version control, you just need to have them on version control. Why? So for example, let's say that we have a VNet inside of an ARM template. So whenever I open a connection, I need to go and make a commit saying like, hey, I opened this connection, I opened it for this reason. If somebody after 2 years thinks like, why the heck do we have an open port to that direction? The only thing that they need to go is go to the ARM template, say git blame. They say, okay, Teemu did this, he did this for this reason. And then you can think, is this reason valid anymore? If you have it in normal environment and you don't have it on version control, there is no way that you're going to figure out why that port is open. And the thing is that, because it might be a live production system, you're not going to close that port. You're just going to leave it open. It's totally fine when you have a small solution and you have a small number of ports, but once you start having more of them, more connections open, you soon have like hundreds of connections open all over, and you're like, so now I have no clue, are we using them? Are we not using them? Who made them for what? And changing that, like making any change to that, if you don't have it, it's super hard. Because there is probably nobody who can tell you why those ports are open. So the only basically option if you want to start closing them is start closing them and hope that your monitoring will tell you, no, now you have an issue. Then you know that you closed something that was important. So the deployment steps, how it should be, is that you make changes to ARM template, then you validate the changes, and then you make a deployment using that. How many here tries the ARM template towards some kind of testing environment before, like a completely new environment before going towards dev? So everybody goes directly to dev with the ARM template. The problem with that is that if we have lots of people, the chances that somebody breaks the ARM template is really, really huge. How many here has broken an ARM template? Like, I'm writing them a lot, and I still break them probably like 3 times a day. Why? Because I forgot to put semicolon, I forgot to put a colon, I forgot the parentheses, they were not matching anymore. And when do I notice it? Hopefully before somebody else notices it. Because if somebody else goes and uses my ARM template, which is the insane number of lines, and they see error in line 2056, what they're going to say, they're not going to like, oh, I'm going to fix it. They're going to be, away. I'm not going to touch this at all. So, demo time. I'm going to talk a lot about Visual Studio Team Services. You can do this with almost any tool, but Visual Studio Team Services is super simple. So first of all, I'm using currently Git. All of my ARM templates are in separate repositories. So I don't have like one repository which is called all my ARM templates, which has all of them. I have separate repositories for every single resource and saying every single ARM template that I have. So in this solution, I have a container registry, which is an Azure service. I have one ARM template for that. I have one ARM template for storage. I have one ARM template for web application. And then I have one for testing, but that's a little bit different. We'll come back to that. And then I have something called tapanila.arm, which is my main ARM template, which then combines the little ARM templates that we have. And I'm just going to very quickly show you my container registry. So container registry is a service that you don't deploy every time you're making changes to it. Like you normally deploy it once and you forget it. Why would you want to have it on ARM template then? Permissions. How many here use service principals? How many here hate them? Like they are super hard to make. Do you know why? Because normally you need to go to Azure AD admins and ask them, can you make the service principal for me? The normal problem is that those guys are like, service principal what? How do you do that? And then it takes ages to make them. And what happens is normal people just put their own credentials into it and use their own credentials to the deployment, which is totally fine unless you have this, I need to change the password every 60 days or 30 days rule in your company, which most companies have, which means every 60 days, your whole build pipeline fails. Amazing. And even better, hopefully more and more companies start to enable multi-factor authentication. What happens when you have your credentials, username and password in a deployment and you have a multi-factor authentication enabled? You get a message on your phone saying like, hey, please authenticate yourself. You're like, what? I did not log in. My script did. But my script doesn't have any way to basically authenticate again. So once companies roll out multi-factor authentication, the service principals is a must, which is an amazing thing. I really, really like it. But here is a very, very basic JSON template. So first of all, I have something content version. So I'm not doing versioning myself. Because if I need to do versioning every time that I make a commit to my ARM template, I can tell you I will forget it. There is no way that I will remember to always version my ARM template so that I know which deployment we have. So that's why I'm doing it automatically from VSTS. So that's why I'm having this nice hashtag there. Then I have parameters. The interesting thing is that the parameters are about 50 lines of code. The whole ARM template is 100. So more than half of the whole template is parameters. It's about how are you going to use them, what are the names, what are the values that we allow, and all these kind of things. So what I have here is that I have principal ID, because I'm asking what is going to be the user you're going to use, and I expect that it's going to be principal ID. Then I'm asking what is the container registry name, and here I know already, because I read the documentation, that the min length is 5 and the max length is 50. Why do I put it on ARM template? Once you start doing the thing, like deployment, if you have a length that's more than 50, it's going to fail on validation. So it's not even going to start doing the deployment. So it's just quicker response from the Azure saying like, hey, you have a mistake here, stop. So it's a very good practice. Like if you know what are the max lengths and min lengths, put them there. It saves a lot of time. Then I have Azure Container Registry admin user enabled. Some people like to use all the words, like Azure Container Registry. Some people like to shorten them. I do both, a little bit changing. Then I have something that is Container Registry SKU. So how large deployment of Azure Container Registry you want. By default, my template is saying it's a standard, but I know that there exist basically 3 options: basic, standard, premium. And I'm again making the limitation, so if you're choosing something, choose from these 3. If you choose something else, it's going to fail. This is just to safeguard and make it quicker to get feedback from it. Then another interesting thing is that I always try to have environment parameter. So you always need to write into the name which environment this is. And we have normally 4 options. So we have production, test, developer, and proof of concept. If you want more, that's totally fine, but it's a very good idea to have certain set of environments. Because the thing is that if you have this, it's very easy to see like which environment this is. Because the other option is that you put the environment into the name of the resources. That's totally fine, but once you start having the environment, the location, the purpose, and all of those things inside of the resource names will become like 26 characters just for all the information that you want to store them. And then you need to describe what are they doing. So you start using shorter names, and some resources don't accept that, long names, and all kind of issues. So tags make more sense on it. Then I have few variables, nothing interesting. But here is maybe the interesting part. So why I have the container registry in ARM template is that I assign the permissions for it. So if I want to give somebody else access to it, I'm going to do it through the ARM template. So now when we add more service principals, we add more people into it, we know exactly who added them, when were they added. This is also very important that if you want to really lock down your environments, meaning that nobody, no human basically has admin access to your Azure. This is the way to do it. Now, you don't need to give permissions to anyone. Like, if I want to get permissions to your Azure Container Registry, I can just go there to ARM template, write my ID into it, and it will give me the access. And you can give any specific role-based access there. So reader, owner, contributor, you can create your own custom ones, use those. So you can do very specific permissions here. Then we have more templates. The thing more in templates is that all of my templates are handcrafted. So I personally write them from scratch normally. But the scratch is basically maybe not the right word anymore, because I already have written so many that I take something already existing and start from that. But I have very similar, like I have the same location, same environment, same contact email, project name in all my templates. When I'm doing VSTS, like when I'm setting it up, one of the things is that I have a build step basically for every repository. So whenever you make changes to my container registry ARM, I'm going to do and make a build out of it. And basically what my build does, this is very, very simple, that it gets the source code, it adds a version to it, and then it will publish it basically inside of the VSTS. So this is basically the part that will make sure that all of my ARM templates are always up to date. How many here are familiar with Git versioning? So Git versioning is a tool that makes sure that if you're using DAGs or any of that kind of things to version your code, Git versioning will automatically generate all of your versioning. So this is a very interesting task on Visual Studio Team Services. It doesn't take any parameters in. You just add the task, and it will give you a version number. If you're using tags on your source control, that's where it gets the version number. If you're using source on your commit messages, that's where it's going to get the version number. And then I'm using something called replace tokens. So what this task does is that this looks for the tokens. So that was the bound parenthesis semver closing it. So this basically just goes and replaces all variables inside of your ARM template. So you don't need to write like which variables you're replacing. This automatically replaces everything with the matching variable from the VSTS. And then I'm just publishing them. And I'm doing the same thing for all of my templates. So this is a very nice way to kind of versioning them and keep them up to date. Another thing that I've done is that I've set up so that I have one ARM template, which is called testing. So if we go to my testing, I've set up here something called branching policies. So branch policies are something that you can set up on branch saying that to be able to commit into this branch, you need to have certain rules met. So for example, you can say that there needs to be a certain amount of people who have reviewed that this change is okay, or there needs to be a certain person who says this change is okay. So for example, if you have a rule set that manager needs to approve all the permission changes, this is a very good way to do it. So now you see somebody has made a change, I go and approve it. Another interesting thing is that you can set up here a build. So what I'm saying is that every time that you want to merge something to master, it needs to go and pass my build. My build name is here testing.arm.quality. So all of my builds that have word quality are meant to be run for pull requests. What it does is very interesting. So if we go and open my build for a quality, and let's open it here, it takes the ARM template and it deploys it. So the only thing that this does is that it takes the ARM template, deploys it to resource group, which I call VSTS Playground, with certain parameters. After I've deployed it, I do a new nexting, and I delete the deployment. Why do I do this? Because currently, if you make any mistakes on the ARM template, you will not be able to commit it back to my repository. So now I know that every ARM template on my master branch is deployable, which is very, very powerful. Like, it can never be broken, basically, with these steps. So how this works is that if I go to my nice code editor instead of Visual Studio, Visual Studio Team Services, and I create a new branch. Let's call this igloo demo. And then I go to my branch, I go and make edits. So let's say I do an edit and I forgot one parenthesis, and I do a commit on it. And then I create a pull request towards my master. I add my reviewers there, and I just create it. So now every time that the pull request is created, if you are not an admin, you would not be able to see approve at all. So you can make this so that every developer can approve their own changes as soon as the build has finished, but only when the build has finished. So this is to make sure that you're never there like, oh, I was busy. I committed on Friday, 4 p.m., and oops, my ARM template doesn't work anymore. This is just to basically make sure of that. And at here, we can see that it's saying build and run, and now it says build failed. Now, if my demo works perfectly, this will explain it nicely. And currently, I have a little bit issue. So Visual Studio Team Services currently, in my instance, has an issue of getting source codes. So that's why it's failing, which is a very interesting issue. This should not be happening. So there is a support ticket open about it. But the idea would be that you can then get, basically, tested your ARM deployments. Now, another thing is that whenever you make changes to any of my ARM templates, what I can also do is that I can take all of my ARM templates and then make a deployment. But before we go there, I'm going to show the main ARM template that gathers all of the other ones together. So I always have this one template that then gathers them. Of course, if you have multiple environments, you might have multiple ones. So what this template is basically having is that this has lots of parameters, like really lots of them. So currently 80 lines of parameters. Then it has basically 2 currently deployments, which is saying, take this template at this place and go and deploy it. All of my templates live inside of Azure Blob Storage. So all of my release steps start so that when I've made a build of the ARM template, I release them to the Blob Storage. Another thing which I do is that the ARM templates that are linked need to be publicly available with the URL, which means that if you put them on a Blob Storage, you can also say that you need to have the SaaS token, so basically the secure access token to be able to access them, but anybody with that URL will then be able, of course, to access it. So what I do here is that I need to do and give the token as a parameter, and I will add that basically to the end of the link to make sure that it works. And then what I do is basically I just give all my parameters to those ones who are inside of my resource groups. So this is basically just having the links of all my ARM templates and then a huge number of parameters which I'm pushing down to those templates. So now if I, let's say, add a new service, I would just add, let's call this new service.arm template with these parameters, and then I would be pushing it. And every time I make a commit to any of my resources, which is basically tapanila.arm, storage.arm, or website.arm, I'm going to make a deployment. Currently, I only have a developer environment, so I'm currently only doing the deployment straight to the developer environment. Again, if you want to make sure that you don't have problems on your developer environment, you can always first start by deploying the whole thing into a new resource group. After it completes, run a unit test or integration test against it. Works, delete it, deploy to dev, and you're totally fine. And you can do all of this kind of chaining a lot on the Visual Studio Team Services. Then another thing which I currently have is that I do a Docker registry, and then I do a Docker builds. So currently in this case, I'm saying that here is my code, which is currently doing the Docker images. Run it in the same time as I'm doing the ARM deployment. Because before I complete, I need to have both my Docker image ready and my ARM templates ready. And after that, I would say then, of course, now that the whole infrastructure is ready, take the Docker image and go and deploy it to my infrastructure. Here, if you look like what my task does, so all of my build tasks for ARM templates, what they were saying that whenever I complete, go and drop the template.json into the next task. So it's very important that my build tasks are not publishing the ARM templates. They are just producing them, and they are then kept as artifacts. How many here are separating their VSTS things into builds and releases? That's one of the best things you can do. Because let's say that you, for some reason, have wrong variables in your deployment. What you would normally then do is, of course, I would start my build again, and then I would change my variables, and then I would do release. It's totally fine as long as your builds are short, But let's say that your build is doing lots of compilation, lots of testing. It might, let's say, take you 15 minutes to do a build. So every time that you made a mistake configuring your release means you need to wait 15 minutes. If you have them separate, you're just saying, use these build artifacts that I built before. So for example here, if I now trigger a release, it's going to first, of course, ask which environments I want. I'm totally fine with all of them. And then it's going to ask me which artifacts do I want to use. Because I'm doing Git versioning on all of my ARM templates, and then I'm doing a datetime-based build number on my container, I can now here select that, hey, I don't want to use the latest storage ARM version. I want to use the version 0.1.0. And then I can go to all of my resources and use the exact version that I want to use to do a deployment. And if I need to, let's say, release this 20 times, I just release it 20 times. Then, variable groups. So important thing is that when you're building these tasks, you want to give variables to your environments. So in Visual Studio Team Services, they have something called variable groups. How many use variable groups? 0. It's the most amazing feature of the VSTS currently. It makes your life so much better. So what this does is that I have 2 environments. First is called IglooConf development, which has variables like contact email, container registry name, environment, hosting plan name, location, my principal ID, my project name, storage account name, and web app name. Now, when I import these to my ARM template, I just use that, hey, I want to insert contact name here, I want to insert that here. Now, if we go and look into the production one, the production one has basically all the same keys, they just have different values. Now, if I go to my releases, so you can use these both in builds and in releases. So in my nice release pipeline, I can link variables. So whenever you want to use variables, you just say, I want to link my variable groups, like this. And then it will ask you, how do you want to scope your variable groups? Is it based on the release, or is it based on environment? So let's say that you have 6 environments. You first start by having some kind of like very early testing environment. Then you have dev, then you have test, then you have user acceptance testing, then you have prod 1 and prod 2, for example. Now how you can do is that you have one variable group for all of those environments. And what you're always saying, like, hey, my production should go into that environment. And then you don't need to change your code. Because, for example, now let's say that we are now happy with our ARM template, like we're happy with our pipeline. But now, of course, we want to add one more. Because we currently only have our dev, we want to add our production. So I want to take my production and just say, I want to take a clone of my current dev environment. So this has the exactly same tasks, exactly same things. But what I'm just going to go in here and do is say, go to my variable groups, go here and say edit. I don't want to use this anymore on my copy of dev ARM deployment. And I just say, I want to instead use my production variables in this new template. So I just copied my whole, all my tasks without changing any of it, just changing, here's my new variables. I can now deploy to production. That makes so much easier your life, because normally, if you start changing the variables in any other way, the possibility that you make a mistake is huge. Because if you have these releases that require somebody to go and approve it, you normally don't ever run it till the end when you're testing. You don't run the whole pipeline. So the only time that you're finally going into the end is when the manager goes and approves. What's very nice in that process is if you are using the variable groups, you know that it will go through because you have the same variables. If you don't use these and you're always like making little changes on the tasks, you will probably have lots of problem, and then it will fail, and then somebody comes to you and asks like, so why did our build fail? So variable groups, the best thing currently, I would say, inside of the VSTS. Another thing is that it's pretty new. So variable groups has not been there, I think, I think 6 months only. So VSTS is also evolving constantly. There is a very soon coming new features that instead of tasks, instead of creating a custom task, you can call an Azure function. So whenever you make a release task, I can call to Azure function, it can do whatever it wants and return me, do I continue on my build or not? Another thing is gated releases. Gated releases is a very interesting term is that you can basically hook up monitoring. So when you're doing deployment, you do A/B testing. And once let's say the B has shown that it doesn't produce any results. So you basically, once you're in that state that you're doing a release, you keep maybe 10 or 20% of your traffic into the B environment. So still the old production gets most of traffic, the new environment gets a little bit of traffic. You look at the analytics and see like, there is no errors. Currently, it's going to be only implemented on application insights. Out of the box, you can build your own stuff, but application insights will be provided out of the box. You can say that after, let's say, 3 hours, with no errors, we're going into production with a new version. So you can build very, very complex and automated pipelines into it. But the interesting thing is that you don't have to do it. So how many here have a CI/CD, like really, and using it? That's pretty sad because I think that this is one of the things that makes huge value for any size of the company. Even if you are one single person, like the first thing that I personally do when I start a new project is set up CI/CD. That's the first thing that I do. Like I set up so that whenever I do compilations, I can do it from basically any machine by just committing a code. Why is this important? I, for example, might not have Visual Studio on all of my machines that I use. I can still go to nice code editor here and make a small change, and it will go through my CI/CD. It will make sure that the change is okay, and it will commit it. That might not be the most important case, but another thing is that let's say you switch a computer. Switching a computer is super easy because I don't really need to worry about environments anymore. I can take anybody's laptop here who has Visual Studio, go and get my source code, make the changes, push it to Git, and it will go nicely to production. So that's why I think like it's really, really helpful. Another thing which I think is like very helpful is when you do ARM templates, especially on the first times, you're going to have lots of these like, why the heck doesn't this work? If you have a nice pipeline, it will be pretty easy. Because you're just going to say, commit, look at the nice statistic, doesn't work. Commit, look, doesn't work. So it will make it so much easier to do the commits, so it will not be that painful when the ARM template doesn't work for you. Because it will not work for you the first, let's say, 100 times when you're doing the handcrafting. But after that, it will get better, I promise. So, any questions at this point? Nothing. Everybody is super happy. Everything is super cool. Everything is super clear. Everybody is going to start using VSTS tomorrow and put ARM templates there, versioning, deployments. Awesome.
Teemu.
Yes?
How would you start if you a whole bunch of learning to do with that?
So how would I start? I would first of all start from the ARM templates, because you kind of need to have the ARM template to do the deployment. So everything else except the ARM templates are super, kind of like there's lots of guides on how to do it. Currently, the ARM template guidance of how to do it on VSTS is very thin. Like, I think there is currently about 6 blog posts out of it. But basically, just doing it is pretty simple. So basically, putting it in one repository, putting the versioning on it. You don't even need to have the versioning in the first place. Just put it on one repository, put the Azure deployment task. I will do it right away, so I will see like it's like it's simple. So if we go to builds and releases, let's create a completely new environment. I will call it IglooConf CI. And interesting thing, VSTS is free for you. So it doesn't cost you anything to get started. So there is no reasons why you don't do it. So the first thing it asks you is, where do you get your source code? All right? I will get my source code from tapanila.storage.arm. I will use master only to do deployments. That's it. Then the next step is basically, I want to do deployment. So deployment. The deployment will ask you a few things. First of all, what is your Azure subscription? If you have never used VSTS before, it will ask your credentials. You log in once, you see all of your subscriptions. So I'm going to use my Microsoft Azure sponsorship one. Then it will ask you which resource group you want. All right? I'm just going to type here something like IglooConf CI. And then it will ask you the location. You just select it here. So as you see, this is not like I'm writing some text file. This is more point and click. The interesting thing is that it's point and click until it doesn't work. When it doesn't work, then you need to start like really digging deep. But it's normally pretty easy to get started, and it works normally pretty nicely for normal scenarios. Then it will ask you, where does my ARM template come from? So you can say, here is the URL, or here is the file. And the thing is that I don't need to know what are the VSTS bat files or anything like that. I can just say, click the 3 dots, and it will show me nicely my source code. And then I can just say, it's a template.json, and OK. Now the only thing that you need to do is that if you want to overwrite the parameters, here is where you basically write them. So it always starts, like there is a nice instructions here, like how to make them. But you always basically start by writing the name of your ARM parameter. And then you can write basically anything here, like let's say this is IglooConf CI, and everything together just to make it work. And that's it. Now you have your whole pipeline ready for your deployment. Now you just say save and queue. Which agent to use? I'm going to use the hosted one, which is a default ready on the VSTS. So this is how you get started. And the interesting thing is that it's very easy to come and listen to me and see me clicking through. You need to do it yourself. The first few times will take a lot of time. Like creating your first pipelines will probably take you, I would take a few days. Basically, at least reserve a few days, basically to try it all out, face some issues, because you will face issues, and then basically just learn from those and then start doing it more and more. The more you start doing, the better you get at it. Yes?
Teemu, when you become an advanced user, why would I want to go to the UI and be version control as I'm doing the ARM template version control?
Yes, so can you put all of this to version control? Yes. This produces a YAML file, which you can go and edit. If you really like editing those files and you hate UIs, feel free to do it. There is nothing stopping you. But personally, whenever you do it for the first time, I would always use the UI. Even these days, I like to use the UI because it's very simple, it's very clear, it's very powerful. It's faster to do it on UI than write it, but some people like Vim and Emacs and really want to go deep into the one file and figure out why it doesn't work in a comment line. Any other questions? If not, I want to thank you. And if you have any questions, please catch me after this. Thanks.